Just to say thank you very much for joining. I'm Ellen McCallum. I'm from Entrepreneurial Education, and we coordinate a series of webinars working closely with European Schoolnet, who and through the School Education Gateway, an initiative of the European Commission, DG Education and Culture, who offer this School Education Gateway as a means of finding out more about the topics that are important to teachers right now, and also as a way of bringing together individuals to share ideas, to share practice, and to offer a means of finding out who else is working in this field. So if you'd like to join the School Education Gateway, then we'll be sharing links through this webinar, and there will, at the end of the webinar, you'll be able to see those. So within School Education Gateway, there is a collaborative space for entrepreneurship education where all of the webinar information is shared. But of course, if you've joined this webinar, you will also have registered, and we will have through that permission to share with you future webinars that will be done through this and on other topics. So there's a whole series, usually about one a month, and you'll be welcome to all of them. Previous ones are also, the recordings are available, so you can see those there. But I'm delighted for this webinar to welcome Margherita Bacigalupo and Martin Lackeus to join us to talk about both EntreComp and then how EntreComp relates to this. Within the definition of EntreComp, we talk about value creation for others, and how we look at that within learning. So Margherita Bacigalupo is the architect of the EntreComp Framework, and she is working within Joint Research Centre within the European Commission and has developed the EntreComp Framework and the definition which supports it with a huge number of experts from around the world. And so she will share with you today a little bit of insight into the framework as a reminder for some of you, but perhaps as new information for others. And also then a chance to see how this links through from the framework through to then value creation, learning that offers the student the opportunity to create value for others, which is part of the definition of the entrepreneurship key competence at European level. Now, Martin will then talk about the value creation approach that he's working within in order to support teachers, schools, and ultimately learners to create value for others through their learning experience. So we're very excited to have both partners here with us today. I think they will cover this in some significant detail, and hopefully we'll have a space to ask questions after Margherita, who will present first, providing the sort of the background and the context and the lead into then Martin's presentation on value creation, learning through value creation for others. So I'm, as I say, very pleased you can both join us. Thank you for making the time to give to sharing this, both with those here today and also those who will be looking at the recording after the event. So first, Margherita, I invite you to share your presentation, and then please, we're looking forward to hearing from you. I'll manage the questions afterwards.
Thanks, Ellen, and thanks to everybody who has joined. It's an honor to present EntreComp before Martin's discussion on value creation. So I keep it short because EntreComp describes what entrepreneurship as a competence is. And the value creation part that Martin will present will address how. And at this point in time, 2.5 years after the EntreComp has been published, even though there are still people that are not aware, we have discussed it so many times that it's about the time to discuss how to implement it. I really keep it short so that if you have questions, then since also the number of participants is reduced, there might be more room for question and answer. So if you see me on the webcam, what am I doing? This is my way to present the framework. Well, I'm mocking swimming. So For me, this gesture represents an attempt to describe something that doesn't exist without water. Swimming only exists if you are in the water. It can be a swimming pool, it can be the sea, a lake, a river, wherever, but it requires water. Entrepreneurship requires action. It requires value creation. The definition that we use, we adopted in the EntreComp is entrepreneurship is when you act upon ideas and opportunities and transform them into value for others. Value that can be of different nature. This is the core work of Martin's PhD. So we have here summarized financial, cultural, and social value, but there are many different types of value. And this is the definition that was framed by the Danish Foundation for Entrepreneurial Learning in 2011, and is the same that we used in EntreComp. A key element is this action, the agency part. So in order to be entrepreneurial, you have to turn ideas into action. Original definition from 2006 recommendation from the Parliament. Here you have being entrepreneurial is learning through creating value. And here is the link that when the slide will be shared, you'll be able to open. I kept a long presentation, many slides, so that in case you have more curiosity and you want to go in depth, you have more resources, but I'll really go quickly through it. So what is important in this definition is that there is this part of agency, the action, the part that action is oriented towards value creation. And it can even be a pretended value creation. So there might be situations that are designed with a core focus on learning that don't create, that are more of a simulation than a real value creation. But the focus, value creation is intended as the way to create entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship as a competence. Here I skip because Martin will go. Maybe you don't all know that EntreComp is a framework that is designed for lifelong learning. So it's a very broad, this definition encompasses any type of value creation at any stage. So it applies to 5-year-old kids in the pre-primary, as well as people that are retiring and willing to take up new challenges after work life, people in the work life in a structured organized context, so corporate entrepreneurship, as well as any kind of active engagement in creative value in society, which may be taking care of a community garden, occupying a space that is empty in the city to create a space for kids to play with each other. So any action aimed at creating value is an entrepreneurial action, and the framework has to describe it. The description using the framework has to cover it. So this is why also this definition is broad and encompasses all type of value. I wanted to introduce the structure of the framework so that those of you who don't know it at least have an idea of what it is about. As I mentioned, it's a descriptive framework, not prescriptive. It says what entrepreneurship as a competence is, but it doesn't say how to implement it. And it took the narrative of the 2006 recommendation saying that competencies can be grouped in 3 areas, one dealing with ideas and opportunity, one dealing with the transformation of these ideas and opportunity into action, and then a mediating area that is the one of the resources that allows to transform ideas into action. And if you unfold this wheel, you get some petals popping out, 15 competencies, 5 per each area. So we have in ideas and opportunities things like the capacity to spot opportunities, to be creative, to set a vision that helps you drive your decision-making process, the capacity to value the idea that you generate, the value that other people can bring to your ideas, and the aspect relating to the impact that these ideas could have in society, in the environment, aspects relating to ethical and sustainable thinking. Then we have the part of resources that allow to transform these ideas and opportunities into action, that are divided into main branches, let's say. One that deals with personal resources, motivation and perseverance, and self-awareness and self-efficacy, and others that relate to the management of external resources, the mobilization, we say, because before managing you have to get the support of others, get them on board, obtain resources that allow you to achieve your goals, and this could be, you can think also in non-material resources like competencies. If you're setting up an expert group on something, if you are a policymaker, you have to identify exactly what is the expertise you want to bring, identify who's the expert in your territory, and is about mobilizing them to mobilize their competencies as resources. And then there is the part that deals with the turning the ideas into action, that has one part more relating to the coping with ambiguity, uncertainty, and risk. So when you have to make decision under uncertain condition, the capacity to take the initiative to transform these ideas into action, the planning and management of what you have to do and how you have to display the use of the resources you have been able to mobilize, the capacity to work with others within your organization, outside your organization, within your team, within the hierarchy you are dealing with, and especially a very, very entrepreneurial trait is the capacity to learn through experience. So all these value creation activities that have to be created have to be set up to generate value and to learn from this value creation process. We talk entrepreneurship as a competence, so the core is developing the transversal competences. Value creation is a means to achieve that, but the learning through the experience of creating value is a super important aspect of this framework. And this image means simply that you can take the framework as a Lego architecture kind of thing, so in which every piece goes into a specific place so that you recreate the perfect jigsaw puzzle, three-dimensional, or it can be taken this way, so more of a classic Lego approach, so a box of colorful bricks that you can use in the way that is meaningful to you. I like to make this difference because depending on the context and depending also on the culture of the organization that takes up the framework, it can be more normative. The framework is not normative, it's descriptive, it doesn't say it's not prescriptive, and it gives an idea of what it entails to be entrepreneurial with these 15 competencies, and this suggests that to be competent you have to display a certain degree of proficiency in each of them, but not everything is constructed at the same time. So depending on the level in which you act, you may want to focus on a subset of competencies or on a subset of levels, or create a pathway that is specific to your stakeholder group, or your personal development that is based also on what is interesting for you. And this is on an individual basis. If it's an organizational basis, it's more different. But what I wanted to say is that don't take the framework as if it was an image that you have to recompose. Take it as a box in which there are elements that may help you create things that are valuable for you. Then the framework is very articulated. It describes each of these competencies into threads, and for each thread it identifies 8 levels of proficiency. So it goes to a fine grade level of description to support those who have to take it up with the maximum guidance possible. Still, if you imagine a lifelong learning approach in which a framework has to fit any possible domain of value creation, any possible level of learning, any possible, it still remains generic, so it requires adaptation to specific context. So just to give you an idea, this is the way the framework unfolds, from 15 competencies to 60 thematic threads. Each of them unfolds in 8 proficiency level, and we reach up for 442 learning outcomes that are not meant to scare anyone. They are meant as like a dictionary. There are many words in a dictionary, and we don't use them all. And we don't read the dictionary from the first entry to the last entry. It's just there as a support tool for those who want to get get help and get support to have a matrix in which they can move and orient themselves. So EntreComp basically is a reference that is meant to orient practitioners that want to embed this competence in whatever practice they do, formal, non-formal, informal learning practices. And I think that what Martin will present as a value creation pedagogy is a way to embed all this stuff into meaningful activities focused on value creation that can be applied into a learning context to obtain more, to support, to scaffold learners to become more entrepreneurial. And I've got plenty of other slides, but I think that I will not say anything more than the fact that EntreComp is now widely known in Europe and beyond Europe. It's a framework that is valid because it's comprehensive, but it's flexible, it's modular, and it provides the necessary basis for action to be taken, and there is a lot of consensus around. So it's a good starting point when you want to work on this transversal competence called entrepreneurship. It gives you the basic, the classic Lego bricks that you can play with. And then the way you play is the way you decide to construct activities, learning activities around. So I don't know, Ellen, if you have questions for me. There are in the slides there are resources to a guide that we have published recently, which contains 70 plus cases of use in 2 years since the publication. And then there are also other resources made available by us, like a playlist on YouTube that addresses each of the 15 competencies, but also educational activities that are compiled into Erasmus Plus intellectual output. So iLink project has created a booklet of practices, and Reassess has done a very good job in defining a maturity, a progression model for the assessment of this competence, because assessment is not only what, how, but then how do you assess the achievement of the famous learning outcome. And other resources are available that can help you with some more practical support beyond the descriptive level of the framework. Questions? I think it's been the fastest presentation of EntreComp ever in the history.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? If you can tap them into the chat space, that would be great. I think for me, the strength of EntreComp is in the fact that it translates what the key competence is written as, that definition, into how we can understand that in terms of learning, how we can understand that in terms of designing curriculum, adapting it to new scenarios. As you say, you know, the flexibility of it, to use it, to dip in and out of it. It's not to be used as it is, it's to be taken, used as inspiration, as a guide, as a reference point to dip into. So Hazel is writing a question. And we'll see what comes through there. But you see, so within the full framework, as it were, you've got this sort of top level, which is looking at sort of the 15 competencies. And then down below, you've got the detail of the learning outcomes, which is perhaps what you might only go into when you look at designing curriculum for which you need learning outcomes from. I think this concept of, you know, increasing autonomy, increasing uncertainty, increasing complexity, as you've got on your slide here, is very interesting. And particularly, I think, where you've got increasing uncertainty from designed activities to learning by creating value. And that, I think, sort of leads us in. Hazel said, I really like the fact that teachers and learners are working towards shared goals, improving, promoting shared partnership learning through this. Absolutely. I think that the teacher is as facilitator, as supporter of the learner, and how they're progressing. And it's very much a focus on the process of learning and not the product only of learning. So, you know, when we look at it in assessment terms, that formative assessment leading to perhaps some summative assessment, but not only a kind of what everything at the end, and not understanding the starting point and the progression and the finish point of how the learner goes through a learning experience. Okay, so
maybe Eileen, I can add on this slide that if people read the progression model and they see on the first one on the left is I can develop ideas that solve problems that are relevant to me and my surroundings, and to the right side I can design processes to involve stakeholders in generating, developing and testing ideas that create value, and there are 6 other levels in between. What you were mentioning is that what we are focusing on is that on the increased autonomy, increased uncertainty, increased complexity. So what happens is that on the level of advanced and expert, there is no one designing a learning activity for you. You are learning through experience by facing value creation challenges that may be part of your daily job, or because you set yourself even the task to change the world and start a new political movement, whatever, but is more self-directed as an individual or as an organization. On the lower level, in which we highlight the fact that there is a support from others and the learner builds independence, there is someone who's designing for the learner an activity meant to acquire these competencies, and this is, for me, what is the focus of, I don't know, Marty will elaborate, but value creation pedagogy is about being able to design activities that are meaningful to acquire those competences through staging entrepreneurship. So not swimming in the air, but swimming in water. So value creation pedagogy is meant about providing the water for these competencies to be displayed. If not, we are just trying to mock something that is if somebody looked from Mars, would say, what are these crazy people doing, like moving arms like this? It's not about entrepreneurship. If we go into water, this comes a meaningful movement, and these competencies are meaningful when there is a value creation process.
Okay, so I think we can, that's a perfect point to say welcome to Martin, and thank you very much to Margherita. That's been a great introduction into really to understand how Martin is developing this and introducing this in his work, which has been developed over many years. He's based in Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden, and has been doing some very interesting work on learning through value creation pedagogy, the focus of your PhD, Martin, and also focus of the spin out me analytics with the LoopMe tool coming out from Chalmers as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. And please go ahead, because I don't want to lose any time. We've got about 55 minutes left. So please go ahead. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me be here. I will share my screen, but there should be some a PDF available that you can see the same slides that I'm showing you as well. If you cannot find that PDF, just let us know, and we will help you with the technology. So I think Margherita introduced in a very good way with this framework what a key outcome of being entrepreneurial can be, that you have the competencies to be entrepreneurial. And my work has primarily been about how can we then develop these competencies. How do we make people more entrepreneurial, and what do we mean by entrepreneurial? Value creation pedagogy came out as a way of working for teachers on all levels of education, from preschool, primary education, secondary education, higher education, further education, adult education. And there is a lot of empirical work having been conducted to ground this work. I'm not going to go through that in this presentation, but if anyone wants to know more, there are numerous publications out there that you can read about this, and I provided links in the bottom of the pages where you can see that. For me, I would say that the most important reason for making education entrepreneurial is that we get more students learning deeper and learning for life, and that shoots at the core purpose of education. If we then get a few companies or a few people growing some part of the economy, that's a bonus, but I don't think that is the key issue here. So I'm going to talk maybe up to 30 minutes, but maybe a bit shorter so we have more time for discussion. The first section is about what is value creation pedagogy. The second is about why do we want to work this way, and the third is about how can we do in practice. So, but before that, I think we need to have some context. So first, I would like to show you this little figure here, because when we talk about value creation, we need to also talk about what is value. For whom are we talking about value? Why? There is an article that is it's open access, so if you just search for it, you will find it. What is value? It's called. Normally, when we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about economic value for oneself, people getting rich. But that's just one out of maybe 10 different perspectives you can have on value. Also in entrepreneurship, you can create enjoyment value, you can create social value, harmony value, you can create influence value, and all of these 5 values can be created for yourself or for others. And I put the emphasis on for others in my work because I think that it's the more powerful emphasis when it comes to education. Then we also have another context is what are we talking about here? Are we talking about entrepreneurship? Well, that is where this all started. And there are a number of different definitional perspectives you can take on entrepreneurship. You can look upon it as innovation, you can look upon it as traits that some people have, which I don't agree with, but many have. You can look upon it as organization creation. You can look upon it as new value creation. You can look upon it as focusing on opportunities. You can look upon it as a set of learned competencies, or you can look upon it as a set of methods, entrepreneurial methods that prescribe what people should do. In my work, and I think when we talk about education, I think we need to narrow this down a bit. We need to take away maybe even more than half of these perspectives that we have on entrepreneurship. So when we go to the broader view of being entrepreneurial rather than working with entrepreneurship, we need to take away organization creation and a number of other aspects of what it means to be entrepreneurial. So in my work, I've been putting a lot of emphasis on new value creation, on competencies that can be learned, and on entrepreneurial methods. So with that said, let's get started with what is value creation. So it's ultimately about learning through creating value for others. And the longer version is the one you can see here. Let students learn by applying their existing and future competencies to create something, preferably novel, of value to at least one external stakeholder outside their group, their class, or outside their school or university, outside the building, outside the campus. Implicit in this definition here is also a little bit of a progression. You can start creating something of value for your classmates in your classroom. And when you've done that, you can go on and do something for somebody outside your own class. And as a third step, you can go outside the school. That is the most scary way of working, but also the most powerful when it comes to learning and developing entrepreneurial competencies. Next, I have a slide with some examples. We've been studying this way of working in a number of different contexts on all ages, and here are some examples I would just like to highlight. We've been looking at preschool children helping architects to design a new building. These kids are around 4 or 5 years old, which you can see on the vest that they are wearing. We've also been looking at slightly older kids, students lobbying in national media to save a TV program for kids that they really thought was interesting and valuable. And they managed to save this TV program, and the production company in Sweden produced a third series of this TV program just because these kids fought for it. We've been studying students who teach elderly how to use iPads. We've been studying students who use waste materials to craft toys for orphan children in Turkey. I mean, the kids in school were in a poor suburb of Istanbul in Turkey, and the ones they were helping were refugees and other orphan children. We've been studying students who broadcast their own radio program locally, and we've been studying students who write music to texts written by younger students in maybe another school or something like that. So what you can see here is a total absence of creating a new company. This is not about organization creation. This is about value creation for others. And by creating something of value for others, it becomes valuable also for yourself. And this drives a process of engagement and learning deeper, and also developing entrepreneurial competences. What we ultimately see here is what I've been labeled something of an altruistic paradox. It turns out that we humans get more motivated by creating value for others in 10 minutes than by creating value for ourselves in 10 years. So maybe then it's better to ask students, for whom is this knowledge valuable today, than to say, you will have use for this in your future life. And I've met many teachers who have this situation in their everyday teaching, that they have to answer this question, why are we doing this? And then they answer, oh, you will have use for this in your future life. Here we have an alternative way to treat this situation that most teachers are faced in their daily life. To instead ask them, okay, but for whom could you create some value with this knowledge? And then the question comes back to the student and activates them. We have developed 2 definitional questions when it comes to value creation. The first you see here is, are my students expected to interact with someone outside their own group, teacher, class, or school? And this question can be then answered in a yes-no manner, because it is a question of that kind. Then there's a second question. Are my students expected to try to create something of value for someone outside their own group, teacher, class, or school? Another question that can be answered in a yes-no manner. So basically, if the answer is yes on both of these questions, it is value creation pedagogy. If either of them is a no, we need to ask ourselves, is this really value creation pedagogy or not? If the answer is no on both of them, we can be, I would say, pretty sure that this is not the case of value creation pedagogy. So, let me see here. Is this video showing here? Yeah, it is. So in education, we have a lot of focus on learning, but not much value creation for others. In business, we have a lot of focus on value creation, but not so much focus on learning. It's much more rare. And when we have learning and value creation in balance, more or less, I would say that we are talking about being entrepreneurial. And that is something I think we want to strive for. So let's have a look a little bit about why this could be an interesting way to work. Here are 4 challenges that many teachers grapple with. How do I get my students motivated given the tight curriculum plan? How do I achieve pedagogical variation so that my teaching fits all students? How do I manage everyday classroom conflict in a better way? And how do I teach those entrepreneurial skills stated to be crucial nowadays? And here we have found in our research that value creation pedagogy can provide benefits to all of these 4 key challenges for teachers. because it gives a strong boost to student motivation so that students work harder. It clarifies and also simplifies pedagogical variation. I will show you a little bit how that works soon. It also reduces classroom conflict, especially in the ages maybe of between 10 and 15 years old students, where this can be a true challenge for teachers. Maybe not on higher education level, where I teach, maybe that's not such a big problem. And then this helps teachers to develop students' entrepreneurial skills or competencies, entrepreneurial competencies. Exactly those competencies that Margherita showed in the EntreComp framework. And that will make them fare better in life. That we are pretty sure about nowadays. When it comes to student motivation, we have done studies on more than 1,000 students of ages from 8 years old up to 28 years old. And we see a very robust pattern here. There is a strong increase in motivation when learning through creating value for others. They learn subject matter much deeper, and they also develop their entrepreneurial competencies. This is something we can be very, very sure about, and there is a paper down there that you can read if you want to look into the empirical evidence for this. But this is something we now can trust. When it comes to pedagogical variation, value creation pedagogy is a way to go through the entire philosophical playing field of education. Instead of saying that entrepreneurial pedagogy is progressive education rather than traditional education, we here talk about something that starts down in the classroom with a question: for whom is this knowledge valuable today? And then you take a turn towards traditional education, learning by using knowledge. Then we have to go and get the knowledge to create value. Then we have to work in progressive ways, teamwork, problem solving, coaching, and so on. And then comes for others. Then we have to go outside, and then we get experiential education, immersion in communities and learning from practice. And then we go back to the classroom and ask ourselves, for whom was this knowledge valuable today? And then we have gone full circle, and then it all starts over again. And this helps teachers to achieve variation between different ways of teaching, which is one of the most important questions for teachers today, and has been for many, many decades, even centuries. When it comes to how we develop entrepreneurial competencies, here is a model that shows that it is the emotional learning events that develop entrepreneurial competencies. We have activities on the left, for example, creation activities or value creation activities, or if we're talking the more narrow approach, organization creation activities, such as young enterprise, where students start a company. And these activities, they trigger emotional learning events in the students. When you interact with the outside world, it's emotional for most people. When you create value for others, it's emotional. Experiencing uncertainty in your learning environment triggers emotions, often negative emotions. When you work in teams, when you overcome competency gaps, when you get feedback on your own performance. And there are other kinds of emotional learning events. These events, in turn, develop these entrepreneurial competencies that Margherita talked about earlier in the EntreComp. That is how we develop them, basically. This is called, I call this the proxy theory. A proxy is something that goes between one thing and another thing. And it's the emotional learning events that are here the crucial proxy between teaching activities and students' developed entrepreneurial competencies. So when we are talking about being entrepreneurial, we have had to develop a framework or a model that explains what is this all about. And I've been talking about going between learning and value for others, but there are two more perspectives that I think are important not to forget, and that is agency and its novelty. Being entrepreneurial is it's a personal journey, and if we as teachers don't make that journey personal, we will miss out on a lot of the things that make these processes so transformative for the students. Novelty is also a key aspect to keep in mind. It could be novelty for the world, as in something that one can patent, but perhaps more common in education is to have novelty for the student. If it's new for them, then that drives motivation and engagement. And if they feel that they own the process, you have both novelty and agency. So there is a personal axis here. There is this inspirational axis, not only going between learning and value for others in some kind of a perspiration. I've done a video on this. Let's see if it works. So you will have to tell me if that worked or not, because I work in full screen mode here, so I cannot see comments yet. Anyhow, that video, you can find it in the PDF of slides that I provided here. And also, if you search on my name on YouTube, you will find it on my YouTube channel. Please feel free to share that. So finally, just some words on how to do value creation pedagogy. And the first thing we can say is going back to these two definitional questions and use them to tweak our teaching. So here is not a matter of transforming your teaching. It's about making minor changes. Asking yourself as a teacher, how can I add a grain of interaction with external people by doing minor tweaks to my existing student assignments? And then the next question is, how can the energy my students already spend in school create some value for external people by me doing minor tweaks to my existing student assignments? And what we have seen is that if teachers do this, it will establish a culture of students always asking them upfront, for whom are we doing this, when discussing some assignment to do. So students start taking it for granted that they should have an external audience for what they are doing, regardless of what it is. We also see that there are a number of questions that we can ask students to ask themselves. And many of these questions are taken from entrepreneurial methods. And I will not go into detail about that here, but For example, effectuation is an entrepreneurial method, and we can use it to ask students, for example, what effects can we create with who we are, what we care for, what we have, what we know, and who we know. And appreciative inquiry is another entrepreneurial method, and there we can ask students to ask themselves, what works really well, and how can we get more of that? Design thinking can be used to ask yourself, how can we know what people need? Let's go out and ask them. And lean principles can be used to ask yourself, how can we know what's valuable? Let's make and test a prototype. When we look at how teachers have applied value creation pedagogy so far, we also see that there are a number of patterns. VCP, in short, can be used as activism. Lobby for or be the change you want to see in society. VCP can emulate a profession on a small scale. Students can work as journalists, teachers, architects, engineers on a mini scale. VCP can be helping ordinary people, helping disadvantaged people, helping others in school. We can see it as career guidance. We can see it as a way to cross subject borders. We can see it on different age levels. We can see it when students have different diagnoses, such as autism, ADHD. And there are both opportunities and challenges with such diagnoses in relation to VCP. We've also developed a spider diagram, which is more or less a checklist, 8 aspects that teachers can consider when designing value creation pedagogy. Do my students get to manage uncertainty, take ownership, work in teams, create value for others? Do they get to learn from feedback? Do they get to work iteratively? Do they get to expand their knowledge? Do they get to interact with external people? And a teacher can do a self-evaluation with this simple spider diagram to see how they are on each of these 8 dimensions, and that becomes kind of a graphical profile for any assignment they are considering to give their students. And then we have a form that can be downloaded at my blog, vcplist.com/resources. And this form has been very appreciated by teachers. We also have a progression model. Even though we have a number of good examples on maximum impact projects or assignments or practices, most teachers would probably start in the first step, where you create value within the class. Maybe you're focusing on enjoyment value, social value. Maybe you work in small, simple projects in small groups, and you test this together with your students. That's where it starts. And then it can grow from there. Using United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is a starting point that many teachers tell me that they really think is good, where students get to consider these 17 goals and think, for whom could I create value in any of these 17 areas based on the knowledge and skills I have, or the ones that we learn in education. Then we have EntreAssess, which is the project that the website that was mentioned earlier, where you see a lot of different methods, tools, and examples on how to assess. And that, of course, applies to value creation pedagogy as well. Finally, I've designed an assessment model that I maybe shouldn't talk too much about here because it's a bit, maybe you need to read the article. It's part of a book, but if somebody really wants to read it, I can email it because maybe you don't want to buy the whole book. It's basically about assessing the emotional activities, because if these emotional activities are so important, let's assess them. And let's assume that if they have experienced these emotional events that they then learn from, let's make them mandatory and just assess them in a pass-fail manner. And instead, let students reflect upon their experiences, and that becomes formative assessment. And we'll be developing an IT tool for this that's called LoopMe. You can go out and have a look at LoopMe on the website, loopme.io. well, that's about it. I've collected a lot of resources on vcplist.com. So just go there and have a look, and you will see much more. Most of my articles are available there, videos and stuff. And well, it's about. Let's now turn on to the questions.
Thank you very much, Martin. Now, perhaps if you can type your questions down below. What might be interesting is if we just do a quick poll of some of the questions we arranged before the workshop, while we're collecting questions onto the main. We should have a few more there as well. While we collected questions onto into the chat room. We've got a question coming in. Can we have access to materials? Absolutely. What we'll be doing is we'll be collating the recording and the materials shared into the web link that we'll share at the end of the seminar. One question I think I'd like to ask, Martin, is we touched quickly on some of the examples of the activities that you've seen used by teachers to create, using value creation pedagogy, students creating value for others through their learning experience. Is there any that you'd like to highlight particularly as ones that you think had more impact than others, perhaps? We've also got a question coming in from Juan Ratto Nielsen, so I'll come to that in a little moment as well. I think we need to remind ourselves of the importance of relations, and it is when you meet another person and get feedback from that person that feels personal, that we get access to these very deep motivational effects that we see here. And motivation then triggers deep learning. So, sometimes I get this, I hear about these examples where people collect money to give to charity or something like that. And that's fine, but it doesn't access the deep motivational engagement that you get from interacting with another person. If you want to help people who are disadvantaged, instead of collecting money for them, go and talk to them. Go and ask them, what can I do for you? How can I use my knowledge to help you? We had a truly powerful example of students. They went to a center for homeless people and offered these homeless people to write their life story. The power of such a practice. You have this very personal meeting with these homeless people. You offer them to write their story. And you develop your written, your ability to write text in a way that maybe, you might not have had access to if you hadn't met this person. So I think that's a key here. Interaction is key. Value creation pedagogy, yeah, sure. The important thing is value creation for others, sure. But don't forget that interaction is almost as important, I would say. And then we also we have the opposite when you have a lot of interaction, but there is no value created by the student to the other person. Guest lectures are an example of that. I think guest lectures are fine. It's just not as powerful as if the students get to do something that can be valuable for that other person coming to visit them. I think you're right there. I think one of the interesting examples I think you flagged up was the young children going out to advise architects on what might work for them within building design. I think that's great. It's fantastic. And, sometimes sometimes it's complex to take children or students out of the classroom, but it can be interesting and very powerful for both the architects and the children. Now, coming to Juan Ratto Nielsen, he says, thanks, Martin. How is value creation pedagogy comparable to PBL, and I'm going to assume that means project-based learning rather than problem-based learning. Juan, correct me if I'm wrong there. So how is VCP comparable to project-based learning? You might want to go back, Martin, to your slide actually, where there was a little mention of that, perhaps. I'll come back to these.
Yeah, so let me start. Let me share my screen again, and I can show you from where do I do that? Sorry. Yeah, so maybe let's not do that. Sorry, I'll just try to answer the question instead. I mean, I would say that there are a number of similarities here, but I would perhaps say that the more important comparison is the differences, and I would say that you can do a lot of projects in education where you don't get to interact with someone outside your group or especially outside your class, and if you don't, you won't get it won't become as motivating as otherwise. You can have a project that is you can say that it's a project with authentic content, fine, but that doesn't mean then that there is some potential for the students to create something valuable for someone else. So when we work with value creation pedagogy, we probably often work in projects because it's natural. It's difficult to create value for others. You want to team up with other people with complementary competencies. But that doesn't mean that it becomes value creation pedagogy. So I mean, I would say that project-based learning is a great start for value creation pedagogy because you can take an existing project course or something like that, and then you add external interaction and you add value creation for others, and suddenly you have empowered your course maybe multiple fold times. So there are similarities, but more importantly, there are some key differences, I would say. I have a comparison table in an article that I wrote that I wanted to show you, but yeah, it's called Bridging Traditional Progressive Education with Entrepreneurship. In that article is a table illustrating some of these similarities.
Perhaps you can add a link to that into the chat box. That would be great, because I'm sure Juan.
Yeah, I'll do that. Look. Yeah, I'll do that.
The other question I would like to say is perhaps something that is a challenge in some countries where you have inflexible learning environments. It can be tough to take students outside the classroom. It can even be tough. In some countries, it's not allowed to bring people into the classroom unless they are a teacher. Are there other ways that perhaps you've come across, that you can bring that relationship, that networking opportunity, that sort of ability to talk to external people beyond your immediate peer group, the learners, about the value you're hoping to create for others? Perhaps online, perhaps, there's many opportunities for online collaboration. Have you come across examples which use online, so may navigate through some of the challenges of taking students out?
I mean, we have a perfect example of that right now. We are using a webinar platform to interact with each other, and I think, I've come across a number of examples where students collaborate with another school, maybe even in another country, over Skype, and that is very engaging. You have a personal interaction if you see someone else on a video in a synchronous way of communicating. You can communicate, without being there at the same time too. It's not as powerful as real time communication, but fine, that also works. Someone else is answering. So I mean, I think the digital society we live in today makes it. There are no excuses for not interacting with people outside your own environment in today's connected world. I mean, people are there at press of a keyboard, and you can actually find people and try to interact with them. It will not succeed, Many times they will just say, I don't want to talk to you. Fine. That's a part of being entrepreneurial. There is an uncertainty involved. Not everybody will want to interact with you. That's something we need to learn. That's perseverance, you know. So yeah, I think, but I also think we want to try to go outside. But I mean, there are of course practical challenges with that. But I would then say, yeah, sure, but once a year you can let the monkeys out, you know, in a zoo. Why can't we let our students out?
That's some of the challenges that education systems face, certainly, and some of the challenges that we need to overcome. But I think, yeah, so there are starting points, and perhaps you know, sort of digital learning can facilitate interesting opportunities to work with people outside the classroom. Okay, great. Now, anyone got any more questions? We're having a couple of people needing to leave because obviously we've come to the end of the first hour. We usually run for about sort of 70, 75 minutes. We've got a few people typing here now too. Let's just have a look to see what comes through. So just as a reminder, we'll be leaving the links to the recording of the webinar, and also you can go to the School Education Gateway website in order to see the activity the activity and the resources that have been shared here today. I'll put those links up towards the end now, and I think that they should be uploaded over the next couple of days. So the link that's gone in there now is the one to the School Education Gateway itself. It's an open link, but you can obviously register to join that particular group in order to receive access. Okay, so we've had a few things through. One colleague, Liberta, has said that thank you very much for the webinar, valuable. Even though she's not included in the pedagogy field, she's got some hints for the working side. So that's great, multi-purpose. And I think then now we can link to, just provide a quick link to where you can find the recordings for the webinars, which is here. So if there are no last questions for Martin, or perhaps for Margherita, just alert me if you're going to add another question now. I think we are coming to a close. I would like to say thank you very much to Margherita for introducing EntreComp and looking at and introducing the sort of the ideas of the framework, how it can be used, the opportunity it offers to translate the key competence into practical learning, and also then the opportunity it offers to, there we go, there's the links there as well, the opportunity it offers to use EntreComp in different ways, a reference point, a framework, a dictionary of terms even. It can help people come to a common understanding of what we mean by being entrepreneurial, by this key competence, trying to create a sort of a vision of what we're talking about, as well as then offering insights into how to translate into learning. And then from Martin, we've had an introduction to value creation pedagogy, what it means really learning by creating value for others, which links directly into the EntreComp definition. And you know, it is something that can be a real goal for entrepreneurial learning. If we look at the key competence, we want to use these EntreComp competencies, develop them individually, but also develop them in combination for different purposes. And one of those is, one of the very important one is to look at that definition and say it is about value creation for others. So we really thank you, Martin, for sharing your insights and your views on how that can be achieved through the very interesting work that you're doing with many teachers across Sweden and beyond. So I'd like to say, from me, thank you very much. It's been very interesting, and I hope to welcome you back to future webinars, to future collaborations in this forum. Thank you to Asti, who is the representative from European SchoolNet, running School Education Gateway, who's been behind the scenes coordinating all of this. And thank you very much finally to Margherita and to Martin for contributing. There is a Teach Meet for those part of the eTwinning network next week on November the 14th at 6 o'clock, looking at subject-based learning. And you can find information on that also in the links that we've shared. And there will be future webinars, probably now starting in January with this group. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.